Welcome to IVF This, episode 47, Navigating Miscarriage and Loss with Amy Watson. Welcome to IVF This. I'm your host, Emily Ginn. I'm a mother to two beautiful and feral boys. I'm married to my favorite person in the world. I'm a social worker, a life coach, and an IVF warrior. I'm here to teach you how to manage your mind and emotions during your IVF journey, to break free from anxiety and regain control of your life, even in the midst of infertility. I'm going to teach you to say IVF this to how we think about, talk about, and experience infertility. Let's go. Hello, my beautiful friends. I'm really excited to bring you this interview today with a fellow coach of mine, Amy Watson. She is a life and grief coach. She uses her lessons that she's learned through her own experience with stillbirth and miscarriage, combined with powerful mindset tools to help moms find the joy in their lives, even without their babies in their arms. And I think that is so beautiful. I really enjoyed this conversation. This is not something that most people talk about, right? A lot of the things that we talk about on IVF This are things that people don't talk about. So it would stand to reason that miscarriage and loss would be another topic. So of course, trigger warning that we will be discussing some of Amy's personal experience and some of the hardships that are associated with that. But I really do hope that you guys have an opportunity to listen to this, particularly this month of October, which is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month, and the importance of the visibility of this month and the importance of the advocacy of this month is just tremendous for our community. You know, it's interesting. Amy and I were talking before I recorded, and she mentioned that infertility was not something that she had ever experienced. And you know, I think it just goes to show you this entire journey, it doesn't discriminate, right? I've never experienced a pregnancy loss, and yet infertility has been my journey, right? And so every single person, I'm sure you guys have seen this on Pinterest or Instagram, every single person in this world is fighting a battle that none of us can see. Infertility is a very disenfranchised grief. It's a very invisible grief. And pregnancy and infant loss is the same thing. It's a very invisible grief. So I hope you enjoy this interview as much as I enjoyed getting to talk with Amy. And as always, have a beautiful week. And I can't wait to talk to you again.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. I have Amy Watson here. I'm so excited to chat with you today. As I mentioned in the intro, this is all about October, Pregnancy Loss and Infant Loss Month. And so I'm so delighted to have you on the podcast to talk about these incredibly important issues in and around the world of infertility. So thank you for coming, and please start by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and for having these conversations. I know they're not always easy to have, but I think so important. A little bit about me. I have to preface when I was getting ready to come on, I have to say I'm an infertility ally. I have not had the struggle of infertility. We have been able to have 6 living children.
Wow.
But basically, my story of loss started after we had 4 beautiful babies. Everything was really boring. And our 5th pregnancy, also really boring, kind of textbook pregnancies. And until just a few days before my due date, I thought I was going into labor, but then it kind of didn't go anywhere. And after a while, I realized, hey, like I haven't felt her kicking. And still kind of just like, well, maybe she's taking a nap or something like that. And ended up going into the doctor to find out that our daughter had passed away just a few days before her due date. And so that, you know, as you can imagine, is pretty devastating.
Yeah.
Shocking. Just not something, even though I had heard, we actually had a girl that we went to church with that had a stillbirth a few years earlier. And I remember saying, I can't even imagine, like, that is
right.
Just the worst thing ever. Like, how do you survive that? And But yeah, you just don't think it will happen to you. So we delivered our baby and got to meet her, hold her, spend some time with her, and named her Lauren. And yeah, it kind of started my grief journey from there. We did go on to have another baby about a year later, which that was quite a year grieving and being pregnant again. And then we had another baby who we lost at 14 weeks. Kind of the same thing. It's called a miscarriage. Just went in for a checkup and there wasn't a heartbeat. And then we were able to have one last baby, which was like a high risk pregnancy and really scary. Yeah, but he got here safe and sound a little bit early, but it's kind of a roller coaster of a story. But I think the reason I'm here as a coach is because, once we lost Lauren, I remember kind of looking around at the support that was out there and seeing that a lot of it was kind of this thing where people would say, you're just going to be sad your whole life. This is just the worst and it's going to be sad. And I just didn't want that. Like, I thought, I know lots of people, like famous, people throughout history, lots of people who have been through struggles and they haven't let it keep them down forever. And that was something that I really wanted. And that's what I'd like to do, is to help moms just navigate grief and loss and pregnancy after loss, which can be really challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And just tell them that it's okay. Your life doesn't have to be less than. I think that's what we kind of believe. And probably you see that a lot with infertility, right? It's this, I had this idea of how my life was supposed to go. And now this challenge has come up. And so my life is just never going to be quite as good as it was supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I really want people to know that your life can be amazing and beautiful. And you can, even without all your babies in your arms, that's kind of what I want to tell people and help them with and help them get there.
That's so beautiful. And you're right. There is quite a bit of cultural messaging, especially in infertility, that like our experience of getting pregnant, the surprise of it all, particularly doing fertility treatments. There's not a lot of room for surprises in fertility treatments. It's pretty ironed out. But that this idea that this process is tainted, not that the babies aren't any less wanted or anything like that, right? They're still desperately desired. They're still desperately wanted, but that because we don't get the same experience that we see on Instagram and Facebook and all these excited announcements and things like that, that it is somehow less than. So I love that you articulated that, because I think that does come up a lot in the infertility community. And the other thing that you mentioned that I really loved was that you're talking about how in your pregnancy after loss or late term loss was that you're just going to be sad. And I think for every kind of sub community that there is always this underlying message that's very harmful to the people who are kind of who didn't choose to be part of they're just kind of thrust into that community. For infertility, it's a lot of like the toxic positivity, the just be hopeful and you got to hope and you got to, just stay positive. And that was one of the reasons that I got into coaching, because I was like, well, that's not helpful, because then you just make that mean if you can't access those emotions that you're doing yet another thing wrong.
Yeah. Well, I do think there's a place, right? And a lot of people come from a good place. And I think for me, like I said, when I would join like a grief support group on Facebook, I think there's a time and a place where it's like you just want to be sad and you want to know that you're not crazy.
Yes.
That the way you're feeling, the way you're thinking, like all of it is normal. I think it's a beautiful thing that we have the opportunity to have these communities. But like I said, I think it's also really important if that's not working for you, or if, it's just like the vibe is not what you want there, that there are other ways, and that can come with time, or just like I said, if you want it. I wanted it. I wanted like solutions, right?
Yeah.
So, and I'm like a researcher, I'm like reading all the books, talking to all the people, like studying it out. not in the sense that I wanted to like get rid of my grief, but it's just like, well, how do I do this thing? You know, how do I manage it and live with it and continue on the best way that I can? Like you said, I think well-intentioned, good people, it's good. Sometimes you need that positivity and you need those people cheering for you and checking, you know, your lines and your, all of that.
Yeah.
It's great to have that, but there's also, you know, other options if that's not working for you.
Yeah. I love that. So, okay. So in your background, you covered quite a bit. The acronyms that we hear for pregnancy loss. So PALS, PL, and RPL. So tell us, for my listeners who aren't familiar, what do those acronyms mean? And then I want to talk a little bit about kind of those overarching themes too.
Yeah. So PAL, or pregnancy after loss, which I think, you know, after any kind of loss, whatever that is for you, or how, you know, it gets in the weeds a little bit as with how many losses or how long it's been, or if you had a living child in between. I think any pregnancy after you've experienced the loss of a baby at any point, or like an embryo, any of it, you can want to define it pregnancy after loss. It's got a little more, there's a little bit more going on in your head when it's not just like you said, like have sex, have a baby. Easy as that. So, and then there's just pregnancy loss, which would be at any point in the pregnancy. And then RPL, recurrent pregnancy loss, which would just mean if it happens, you know, more than once. And I didn't define I've had 2 losses. I think recurrent pregnancy loss, you could also define it however you want, but it definitely, a lot of times doctors will want you to have 3 losses before you start like getting testing or doing anything, which that's a whole other story. But I think it's just like, if you've had more than 1 loss, it also, you can define it as recurrent pregnancy loss. Or I know people who have had just like a dozen losses, and you know, that's tough.
Yeah. So you work with all types of categories related to pregnancy loss, infant loss. Are there specific themes that you notice from your clients? Or, you know, for infertility, there's a lot of blame, turn it against ourselves. I would imagine that's pretty similar, but I'd love to hear from you. Like, what are the common themes that you encounter?
That's funny. That's what I have here is judgment, right? So judging our body, right? That it failed. Yeah. Feeling like that failure, that shame. I think for pregnancy after loss, it is that anxiety, that fear, and that feeling like the joy's been taken out of it, right? Like, it's mostly anxiety, and you kind of want to be excited, but you can't really because you don't know what's going to happen. Like, you don't know if you're going to have a loss. Like in my case, if I had a full-term loss after a pretty uneventful pregnancy, it's like, well, then
nothing's safe.
Where's the safe zone? Yeah. And so one of the side effects, I think, too, of being in community and support is you kind of do hear all the different ways, all the things that can happen. And so you have all this information that can sometimes lead to a lot of fear.
Yes.
So, yeah. And I think something else is just that feeling of being alone, because we don't talk about it, right? And a lot of times, until it happens to you, you don't even know like how often it happens. I mean, they say 1 in 4 pregnancies, like known pregnancies, ends in a loss. So once it happens to you, sometimes people do come out of the woodwork, but I think it can be, you can just feel really blindsided for a lot of people. Yeah, they just like don't know where to turn, and they don't feel like they can talk to people because they don't feel like anyone understands or supports them. So I think that's really challenging. Even your own spouse or your own parents, you know, the people that you feel like should be there for you, they're also grieving and they're kind of navigating through this. And so it can be really painful to navigate that and just feel like you don't have the support that you need. I think is really, really common.
Yeah, just listening to you talk, I'm like, wow, there are a lot of overlaps between the world of infertility
Hmm.
and the world of pregnancy loss. I mean, everything that you hit on, I was like, oh, yeah, that's us. Oh, yeah, that's us too.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up the idea of, when you're on these forums and when you're in like Facebook communities and you're kind of exposed to all of the terrible what ifs. There is a term in counseling that we use called vicarious traumatization, which you can see something, read something, hear something that is incredibly traumatic that you didn't actually live through, but it can actually create trauma for you. What are your thoughts about that kind of community and potentially exposing yourself to that kind of trauma? I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. I think that, like I said, kind of at the beginning, I think it's really important to be intentional with what you're bringing into your life, into your mind.
Mm-hmm.
It can be, because like I said, you're just adding things to the list of things to be worried about. And your brain is like really good because you're already in that state of anxiety. You've been through something. So your brain is just going to like latch on to all of those things and the symptoms and the people. So I think it's really important. I talk a lot about emotional energy, and especially during pregnancy after loss. I think it's so important to protect your emotional energy. And if you feel like this group or even this, friend who, you're pregnant together, you've been going through this journey together, but it's like, it's too much. I think it's really important to just really bring it back to your center and say, it's okay for me to take care of myself and to make it easier to protect, because I just think it's already hard enough. Like it's already challenging. It's already emotional. So yeah, it's okay to do that. And you don't have to feel guilty, right? A lot of times we'll feel guilty for like letting go of things or saying no to things or leaving a group that was like pivotal in the beginning of your grief. And now it's too much.
Yeah, that's a really great point.
Yeah, it's okay for that season, right? Like if you're in that season of pregnancy after loss, it's like, no, like I have to protect myself. I need to focus on what's most important, which is like me, my physical health, my family. For most of us, it's like, those are the things. And so just letting go of kind of those other things that might be distracting you or causing you to have to do a lot more thought work.
Right. Yeah, I'm so glad you talked about that because, yeah, I think in some ways we tend to hold on to things, people, communities, ideas that don't serve us in whatever, you mentioned the season, whichever season you're in. And I think it can be very difficult, particularly related to like relationships, friendships, that we acknowledge that not everyone that we are in a relationship with, we will be in a relationship with for the rest of our lives. But I think that we tend to think in those terms. Oh, I'm going to grow old and be in a rocking chair on the porch with this person when I'm gray haired and 85 years old. But what a specific season that you're in might not serve that relationship and you as well. So I'm really glad you brought that up. For this community, are there unique challenges that you have identified, that you've seen? And who knows, we might even find more overlaps between us and infertility. But what kind of unique challenges do your people face?
I think one of the most unique challenges about pregnancy loss or even infant loss is that you're grieving someone you didn't really get to know.
Yeah.
And so it's this like weird thing where, for instance, in my case, you have a stillbirth, it's like their birth and their death, are kind of mixed up to what we would say, right? Like you shouldn't die before you're born. And that's what it is. And so you don't have the good memories. You don't have things to hold on to. A lot of times, all you have is maybe a pregnancy test,
right?
Maybe an ultrasound photo. So you're grieving a dream and a future. But on the other hand, it can be hard that because the world doesn't seem to acknowledge
right
that life because, it was only 6 weeks, quote unquote, or whatever, like it's minimized.
Mm-hmm.
People aren't really open about it. And so I think that's really like there's all different kinds of grief, right? Just so many and different types of trauma. But I think that what differentiates that losing a baby is just that, like grieving someone that you didn't get a chance to know.
Yeah.
And really feeling that it's not acknowledged.
Yeah. I've never suffered a pregnancy loss. I have suffered a failed transfer, a transfer that did not result in a pregnancy. And I just remember thinking some well-intended person, I want to use your words because I think that's a beautiful reframe. A well-intended person asked me, why does it hurt so much? And I think that it is easy to overlook that you're not grieving necessarily just that person, that being. But I know that embryo was a little boy. I'd known that for 3 years. So obviously I had already pictured myself at his high school graduation and bidding him adieu when he got married. And so I think I love the way you articulated that you're grieving someone that you never really got a chance to meet, but you were already so desperately in love with.
Yeah. Well, and I think from what you said too, it's like you almost have to justify it, right? Like people are questioning, like, why are you still sad? You barely knew you were pregnant, or,
right.
Why are you so sad? You could just try again. And we even do it to ourselves. Like there's the whole issue of things people say, and then there's the things we say to ourselves.
Yes.
Which goes back to that judgment. It's like, why am I so sad?
Yeah.
Like this happens all the time. I was barely pregnant, or like maybe, whatever the situation was.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times I think that really slows down the grieving process is when we're upset at ourselves, we're judging ourselves, we're thinking we should be further along, like we should not be this sad, or we should not be crying in the shower still. Yeah, I think it's really important to know that it doesn't matter if it was a little embryo that didn't unthaw, or it's still a life, it's still a dream.
Mm-hmm.
It still matters. And it's different for everyone. I know people that had an earlier miscarriage and were just kind of like, well, that's what happens. Like sometimes chromosomes aren't, it happens. And it wasn't a big deal. I think it's really important to say, hey, if you weren't that upset, that's okay too.
Right.
Right. But yeah, I think there's a lot of those things that people say and then that we say to ourselves in the grieving process that I just don't think are helpful, or they don't help us move forward.
Yeah. I talk a lot about letting it be okay that you're heartbroken and it not mean anything about you, and letting okay that you're in pain and not beating the crap out of yourself. We don't need the thing after the comma or the semicolon or anything. Like it can just be a period. Yes. Oh, I love this so much. So October is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month. Now this is I don't know, your most significant month, right? Infertility awareness has a week in April that we really focus on and celebrate. Tell us why this advocacy matters. Why does October matter?
Yes, I have 3 reasons that I have for people. The first reason it matters so much is because of what I was just saying. I think awareness helps so much with loneliness.
Mm-hmm.
It is so isolating. Pregnancy loss is really, really isolating.
Mm-hmm.
There's just so many stories that would just break your heart of, we do kind of just deal with it, especially the earlier losses, deal with it and move on. Like if you haven't told anybody you're pregnant, it can feel really lonely. And if you haven't heard of anyone, the more we talk about it, the more people are aware that this is a thing,
mm-hmm.
it happens, and that you're not alone. And they would even know like, hey, I can look on hashtags on Instagram, or I can Google this. I can talk to my church or my hospital and see if they have support groups, right? I can find support online, and just knowing that you're not alone And there's people out there who want to help you, which, I think that's a beautiful thing about the challenges we go through, that so many of us want to help the people coming behind us or the people going through it with us. I think why it's important to have this month of awareness is so people know that it happens, and just so the greater society. I think back, if you think about in the olden days or whatever, I think the fact that babies died was pretty standard. Yeah. People knew this happened. But I think in our society today, we think that shouldn't happen, or it doesn't really happen anymore because we have really nice hospitals and ultrasounds and we have all these things. We've kind of swept it under the rug a little bit. Babies don't die just for no reason, a couple days before they're born. This is 2021.
Right.
But it does happen, and it happens, like I said, more often than we think. So that's really, really important. And then my next reason I think awareness is so important is because of education. Again, a lot of times there's this idea of this just happens, especially with earlier miscarriages. But there are things you can do to actually prevent stillbirth in some cases. Counting kicks, paying attention, getting to know your baby, knowing their movement. There's a lot of old wives' tales out there oh, the baby gets big at the end of pregnancy and they don't move as much, right? They run out of room.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that doctors say that if someone's oh, the baby's not kicking as much, they're oh, that's normal.
Right.
That's not normal. So there's a lot of amazing groups out there. There's one called Kicks Count, and there's Count the Kicks. There's apps you can get where you can really prevent some of these things. Or there's all kinds of different things that are really emerging now that people are saying enough is enough. We can't just say this just happens. We need to empower parents to know what they can do to prevent it and how they can heal and all of that. So education is really, really important. Even if you are in that, you've had 2 losses and your doctor's no, you have to have 3 before I do any blood tests.
Yes.
It's no, is there ways to advocate for yourself, find a different practitioner, things like that, where it's no, this matters. And there's things that we can do to prevent this and to be aware of this, to be more open, I think, as a society. What are some things that are maybe more helpful and less helpful?
Right.
Because I think most people mean well. They want to help their loved ones who are going through the loss of a baby. But I think it's good to let people know some things that can be more helpful or not. And it's different for everyone. I don't think we can tell people what to say or what to do.
Right.
Because it's very unique. Overall, one of the easiest things is to just say, hey, I'm really sorry. And I'm going to bring you some chocolate.
Something.
This is just really hard. And I'm really sorry. You don't have to have the right words. You don't have to be afraid of saying the wrong thing.
Right.
Just be there for that person and understand that this loss isn't just a one-time event. It's something that they're going to carry with them. So stick with your friends and your people that you care about just a little bit longer. So I think having awareness and people sharing their stories really helps with that.
Yeah.
People who haven't been through it can see, oh, wow, I didn't think of that. Or it can be really, really helpful. And then the last one I thought of was just giving us space and a voice to honoring these children.
Yeah.
Honoring our own journeys for those who've been through loss. I've seen a lot of posts lately, mostly on Instagram. And, there's a lot of people, they'll have a cute little shop or they have whatever they're doing. And then they're I'm going to stop and I'm going to talk about this thing that I don't talk about, that I haven't shared before, that's hard to share, but it's Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month. And I want to say, this happened to me.
Right.
This is the grief I carry. And this is my story. You see these cute kids here, but you don't know, here's the rest of the story. So I think sometimes we need permission.
Yeah.
To share. And I think having an awareness month or a week or whatever, or a day where we feel like, hey, even like on October 15th, there's a wave of light, which I think is a beautiful thing where everyone at 7 p.m., any time zone in the world, you light a candle for these babies and it goes all around the world. I think just that, just saying like, it's okay to light a candle and tell people about it and share my story and share my baby, because it can be hard to talk about. It can be hard for people to be able to listen.
Right.
It's, we don't want to talk about something sad like that. We don't want to scare people, or we don't want to, whatever it is.
Right.
Yeah. Just having a place and a space to share your story, to talk about these children that, if you have a living child, you get to show their back to school pictures and you get to put them on the little blanket with the months and all those things that you don't get to do when your baby passes away. I think it's a beautiful way to continue parenting your child.
Yeah.
Even if they're gone, is like, just say their name.
Love that so much.
Just talk about them.
I always think that visibility is one of the most important aspects of humanity, is just showing other people. You mentioned the well-intentioned people, and so many of our loved ones don't want us to hurt, but they're also uncomfortable. Nobody's comfortable talking about grief and loss, and unless you talk about it all the time, and people like us don't get invited to a lot of dinner parties to talk about grief and loss. So it is a beautiful way. I love that you talked about honoring the pregnancies and saying their names. And, I've never experienced a pregnancy loss, but I participate in the Wave of Light every October 15th. So yeah, it's such a beautiful way to commemorate these little lives that changed us forever. Okay, if you could distill a couple of really useful things to our listeners who have experienced loss, what kind of things would you, advice, encouragement, whatever you feel like would be really impactful for our listeners?
Yeah, so I'm going to focus a little bit on pregnancy after loss. I'm assuming if they're listening to your podcast, they're probably still in the process of maybe still growing their family, and after loss or multiple losses. Really so important, and I'm sure you talk about this a lot, but just understanding that all emotions are valid and you can feel them simultaneously. Like I said before, it's that idea that you're nervous, you're scared, or you're sad, you're still grieving, but you want to be happy, you want to be excited. And it just seems like, well, those must cancel each other out.
Right.
Or I can't be happy, my baby died. And so then we add a layer of guilt onto what we're doing, what we're feeling. And I just think it's so empowering to just say, hey, this is an emotional season of my life. This is the time. Like, I'm just going to feel all the feelings, whatever they are, but pay attention to the judgment, the guilt, the shame. And we can try to let those ones go. So just try to keep it to like, it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be hopeful, looking forward. There's varying opinions on hope.
Right.
But I love hope. I think hope is great. Hope for the future, looking forward and letting yourself feel that, especially on the days when it's hard, but you just want it. I think that's okay. So definitely just acknowledge your feelings, let yourself feel them. Don't judge them. Don't tell yourself you shouldn't be feeling them. Don't shut it down. I think we do that a lot, right? We shut it down in all the ways with the food and the phone and the whatever. It's like, it's okay to just have a day and just carry that with you. I noticed that a lot of people call them like your griefy days or, the bad days, but you can notice it coming up. Sometimes there might be special like Mother's Day or the due date, or, there's all these dates that are significant. Your baby's birthday. It's okay if that's bringing up emotion, just like let it be there.
Yeah.
That is totally normal and valid. And I know easier said than done, right? Because sometimes we don't want to feel sad, but it's a skill you can learn. Like you can learn to carry it and still be able to do the things you need to do, or call in sick and be like, nope, I'm not going to do it today. I'm going to just take care of me in this way today.
Yeah. I think very often we do a lot of the nope, not today. No, thank you. Because we don't believe we can carry it and still go on and do the things. I talk about a lot of us think that we're going to fall into like this grief pit and we're never going to get out. But that's not how dynamic human emotions work, because I can love my husband unconditionally and still sometimes want to punch him in the face because I'm married. And, but that's the kind of contrast of emotions that we all get to experience. So I love that you talked about that. Thank you for sharing that with us. So how can people learn more about you? How can people work with you? I know you have a podcast, so tell us all the things.
All the things. Okay. So Smooth Stones is the name of my company. Everything is Smooth Stones. On Instagram, I'm at amy.smoothstonescoaching.
Okay.
My website is smoothstonescoaching.com. And then my podcast is called Smooth Stones. And yeah, I love to, like you, teach people skills to navigate just life after loss and moving forward so that you can find that joy in your life. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful process. And I love helping people through it. I coach people one-on-one right now. And if they want to talk to me, it's in my Instagram bio. It's on my website. Easy. Just come and chat with me.
I love it. What's the significance of Smooth Stones?
Well, I went to a conference right about 6 weeks after Lauren died, and I went to a speaker. I went to all the talks on like trials and hard things, people who had overcome challenges. And there was a speaker who was talking about how grief is like a rock in your shoe that you can't ever take out. And so it was just this story basically of how, at the beginning, it's so pointy and painful and like you can't even move. You can't breathe. It hurts so bad. But as you go on and as you do the work, your foot's going to get stronger. Those sharp edges will break off. And of course, sometimes it's still going to hit a nerve.
Yeah.
Yes. But eventually that rock will become smooth and stay there, and you'll carry it with you. And instead of being painful, it's a reminder of that love, that person, that thing we went through, and we bring it with us. So I just loved that. That really touched me at that time when I was in a place where I could barely breathe, barely look up. And so that's what I want, is to help people along that process of like breaking off those sharp edges and carrying it with you.
I love that so much. I've been dying to ask you what Smooth Stones was, but I love that description. It's so beautiful. Thank you so much for coming on, Amy. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for just being a part of, our communities. I know our communities overlap, like a Venn diagram, they overlap.
Yes.
So thank you for just being of service to all of these amazing women who are fighting battles that none of us get to see. So thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it so much.
You're welcome. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of IVF This. If you like what you've heard, click subscribe and follow to make sure you don't miss an episode. And if you want to learn more, head over to www.ivfthiscoaching.com to learn how to work together.